Autumn 1914, the Western Front. Confident it will all be over by Christmas, both sides dig in. This is still a European war. In America, troops face another kind of enemy. D.W. Griffith had begun to film a social drama called The Mother and the Law. Griffith's industrialist was a combination of John D. Rockefeller, Sr. and Jr. Earlier that year, National Guardsmen had machine-gunned armed strikers at a Rockefeller mine in Colorado. They killed not only the miners, but their women and children. Griffith had not planned his film on this scale. He had started, even before The Birth of a Nation was complete, on a simple domestic story, a kind of superior biograph about ordinary people caught in a web of injustice. Bobby Harron was the boy forced into a life of crime, Mae Marsh, the dear one. They marry and have a baby. The boy gives up his life of crime but is framed and taken to jail. Their happiness is at an end. Meanwhile, The Birth of a Nation was an unprecedented success. Confidence in the film industry soared. 5 and 6 reel features and the occasional epic were supplanting the old two-reelers. Studio heads discovered that big pictures could bring big profits. Harry Aitken, who'd backed The Birth of a Nation, planned a setup headed by the 3 top producers. He invited Griffith to form part of the Triangle Corporation with Mack Sennett and Thomas Ince, seen here with Chaplin. Griffith was expected to run his own studio and make a second big picture himself, to match the scale of The Birth of a Nation. He decided to enlarge The Mother and the Law. He built a bigger ballroom set to contrast the life of the industrialist with that of his workers. He built this spacious set as the headquarters of a group of reformers. Griffith considered many reformers intolerant, even though he was at heart a reformer himself. The reformers come to take away the dear one's baby. Griffith built another large set for the courtroom scene. Falsely accused, the boy is sentenced to death for murder. Griffith traveled to the death house at San Quentin prison and based this test execution on what he saw. 3 men cut the threads. Only one does the deed. Yet Griffith knew this was not enough. The only way he could surpass the achievement of The Birth of a Nation was to make an even greater epic. He'd realized what he was up against when he saw this Italian epic in San Francisco a few months earlier. It was even more elaborate than The Birth of a Nation. Griffith was particularly impressed by its art direction and its use of the moving camera. Griffith and his crew also visited the 1915 San Francisco Exposition. The Tower of Jewels had the kind of grandeur he had tried to get into Judith of Bethulia.
Now he could do it. He had the money that was cascading in from The Birth of a Nation. Here below him were the men who had erected this Tower of Jewels. They were workmen who didn't have to be trained. They knew how. So all he had to do was to put the workmen together with his dreams, and he had it.
Griffith began an episode set in Babylon. The walls were strong enough to carry horses and chariots. The sets were designed by Walter Hall and R. Ellis Wales, and Frank Wertman headed the construction team. But Griffith's co-workers asked each other, what had all this to do with the mother and the law? Griffith kept it all in his head. The Birth of a Nation was causing protests because of its alleged racism. Griffith's response was a pamphlet attacking censorship. The theme of the pamphlet became the theme of his new film, Intolerance. He added a third episode about Christ to be woven into The Mother and the Law, and a fourth about the massacre of the Huguenots, a notorious example of religious intolerance.
He was very likely to have heard stories of the French Huguenots from my mother and my grandfather, who were very proud of their ancestry.
The film's designs were based on well-known 19th century paintings. The Marriage Market by Edwin Long was recreated. Constance Talmadge, as the Mountain Girl, gave the role a ragtime flavor. Pushed onto the marriage market, she finds herself up for sale. But Babylon is ruled by Belshazzar, a prince whose belief is tolerance and religious freedom. He permits the girl to marry or not, as she chooses. Griffith's camera lingers over Belshazzar's idyllic city, dedicated to Ishtar, goddess of love. The high priest of the rival god is appalled by such indulgence. He will seek revenge through the city's downfall. The Persians lay siege to Babylon. Belshazzar defends his city. Cyrus, in league with the high priest, makes war upon it. Griffith used miniatures only for this extreme long shot. Everything else was staged full size. The army of assistants he employed would become the next generation of Hollywood directors. The screen had never shown such a battle.
He wanted to sting home the idea that it was man's inhumanity to man that made thousands weep. And he did so. He did so in the most uncompromising of terms.
The night battle was so realistic, it brought out all the local fire brigades. With the battle scenes complete, the residents of Hollywood heaved a sigh of relief. Then they saw an even more gigantic set rising above their homes. It was also for The Mother and the Law.
Nobody knew what it was all about. The actors and everybody concerned was completely bewildered by what D.W. was doing.
As carpenters completed the set, Griffith tried to find a way of shooting Babylon's victory celebrations that would match its grandeur. At first he thought of a balloon, but it made Billy Bitzer feel sick.
He wanted to come in slowly on that huge set, which he did eventually. Not from the balloon, because it wouldn't take orders and stay where it was supposed to. So they built a little track, and then on that they put a wooden elevator.
One camera was on the top elevator, the second was on a second floor of the same elevator. Now this was all delicately counterbalanced, so it was no trouble to move it up or down or stop it at any level. It was at the top when we started the shot, and as we moved forward.
Griffith said he wanted everything in focus, and Bitzer said that's impossible. He said that's why we'll do it. Everything in focus, and everything was.
When the 4 episodes were assembled, Griffith asked Anita Luce to help with the titles.
I looked at it with awe because it had been such a mystery, and I thought it was awful. I couldn't see, I wasn't intelligent enough to see the broad vision of this man.
The editing was a staggering undertaking. Its challenge to enable the audience to follow 4 stories, interwoven yet separate. In the last half hour, Griffith created a climactic race to the rescue such as no one had ever seen. A racing car is commandeered to pursue the governor's train. The hour of the boy's execution is near. The real murderer has confessed. The mountain girl rides to forewarn Belshazzar of the treachery of the high priest and another attack by the Persians. By intercutting the race to the rescue with the carnage caused by intolerance throughout history, Griffith shattered all conventions. Even at private showings for the crew, people were carried away by the excitement.
And a girl in the audience cried out, "Hurry, hurry!" She was as involved in that as the actors were.
This Italian epic was previewed in Pomona, California. It was Intolerance in disguise. Dante Giulio was Griffith in disguise. the film was greeted with astonishment and bewilderment.
How can you sustain interest with 4 separate stories, you know? Be like trying to watch 4 different things on the television. You look at one, and then you switch to another, and then you switch to another, and then you come back to the first one. And it's a, you know, ill-conceived idea.
Desperate to give his film more commercial appeal, Griffith added to the Temple of Love sequence. He also added a linking device with Lillian Gish, inspired by Walt Whitman, Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking. Critical and public reaction varied from dismissal to wild enthusiasm.
Oh, the size of it, the magnificence, the 42 centuries of history. Whoever has done a film like that before or since?
Griffith poured money into Intolerance, convinced that the motion picture had the power to unite mankind and stop all wars.
We commonly think of Intolerance as a box office failure. It was not. It more than paid for itself. What it couldn't pay for was the roadshow extravagance that accompanied it.
As many as 12 roadshow companies, each with its own orchestra, played in large theatres specially decorated for the event. The price of this showmanship was debt. Triangle had troubles of its own, and Griffith secretly signed a deal with Adolf Zukor, the founder of what would later become Paramount Pictures. And to help President Wilson's re-election, he proposed a film equating him with George Washington. Wilson was re-elected anyway on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." 1917. The Allies were taking appalling casualties. Without America, the war could be lost. Lord Beaverbrook, future Minister of Information, invited Griffith to make a great film for the Allied cause. Griffith opposed American intervention, but he was deeply flattered. He travelled to London in March to supervise the English premiere of Intolerance. Every door was opened. It was the most amazing journey of his career. At 10 Downing Street, he met Prime Minister Lloyd George. He was introduced to members of the aristocracy. And the Kentucky farm boy was presented to the Queen Mother, Queen Alexandra, the greatest thrill of my life, he said. When America entered the war, Griffith realized its inevitability. He saw himself as a chronicler of history. He was the only film man permitted to tour the front, free to make any film he wanted. The British government would provide facilities in return for half the British Empire profits. An official record was made of Griffith's tour, which played up the danger. This was actually a quiet sector, as Griffith portrays by not crouching like his escorts. The heavy hand-cranked cameras lacked telescopic lenses powerful enough to capture the action. And momentous events cannot be caught from the bottom of a trench. Viewed as drama, Griffith said, the war is a disappointment. It was certainly hard to film. This shot may resemble a peaceful meadow, yet it was taken during the Battle of the Somme, the bloodiest battle of the war. If you wanted drama, you had to restage it, as the army itself had done the previous year. Griffith followed suit. He rented British reserve troops and staged a mighty battle on Salisbury Plain. This was later advertised as filmed at the front. The battle he was portraying was part of the Allied Spring Offensive, intended to be a stupendous victory.
There are two problems. The first is that far from being a great victory, it's one of the crushing defeats. And the second thing is that he can't tell anybody about it, that this is one of those international secrets that are being kept from both the British public and the American public. So what kind of film to make?
He sent for the Gish sisters, Billy Bitzer and Bobby Harron. They sailed with the American commander.
But when we heard that they were going to be on the same ship as General Pershing, My father assured Mother, "Don't worry, they're traveling with General Pershing. If any ship will have a convoy, it will be that ship." We found out later that they were 48 hours, as I said, without their convoy.
They arrived at Liverpool in June 1917. They were soon filming in English villages which stood in for France. The man with the wheelbarrow is a young actor called Noel Coward in his first screen role. Griffith returned to France with his cast, but he still had no clear idea of what kind of film to make.
And we were within range of the long-distance guns. I know as we drove up in this car, this astonished look on all the faces of the soldiers as we passed. They couldn't believe it.
Griffith worked with army cameraman Alfred Machin. This ruined village is one of the few shots taken in France that were actually used. He returned to California. Fortunately, his sets for Intolerance were still standing, for his fine arts studio was fully booked.
The Great Hall of Babylon became our stage. The underpinnings, which were high off the floor, 10, 15 feet, gave us plenty of room for dressing rooms, camera rooms, prop rooms, everything we wanted. We had a much more modern stage there than we could possibly have in the old Griffith studio. No walking, everything was at hand.
In familiar surroundings, Griffith was galvanized into action. He was assisted by a young Austrian, Erich von Stroheim. Stroheim played in the film and ensured that the German military details were scrupulously correct. Griffith staged new battles on the very spot where he shot the charge for The Birth of a Nation. And he enhanced them with the material he had shot in Europe. Griffith bought this authentic German footage from an Austrian-American named Captain Kleinschmidt, who'd been arrested in America as a spy. Guns filmed by Kleinschmidt on the Eastern Front fire shells which explode on the Griffith set in Hollywood. The story took shape in Griffith's mind as a reworking of The Birth of a Nation. Lillian Gish bids farewell to Bobby Harron. He defends their village against the German onslaught, but is forced to retreat, realizing his loved ones are doomed. When the Germans march in, Griffith exploited his skill for melodrama and suspense. Bobby Harron has one bullet left for his loved one. Dorothy Gish saves the day with a hand grenade. President Wilson was horrified by the atrocity scenes, which he felt would make a just peace harder to achieve. Griffith, mortified, toned them down, but did not remove them altogether until after the armistice, for a special peace version. The film smashed box office records, thanks in part to a lurid publicity campaign.
To my mind, the campaign to sell Hearts of the World is one of the black marks in Griffith's career. It was vicious, vindictive, and petty, and it was tremendously effective. His idea was to sell this as a government film. As such, he argued that criticism of this film was tantamount to criticism of government policy, and therefore adverse criticism could be looked on as an act of sabotage, of unpatriotic sentiment, and worse.
His government decorated Griffith, yet it was hardly the Congressional Medal of Honor, just a cloth badge from the Treasury Department for helping to sell war bonds. Support for his country's war aims had overcome his hatred of war itself.
To help promote a war, I think it hurt his heart, hurt his soul. I don't know, he never told me. But knowing the man, I would have thought so.
However contradictory his motives, no one could have accused Griffith of glorifying war. "I don't believe in wars," he later declared. "I think they're always wrong, on both sides." In 1919, the war is over. Hollywood now dominates the world. D.W. Griffith signs with United Artists, Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and Mary Pickford, forming to protect themselves from the growing power of the big studios. The three greatest performers join with the greatest director to distribute their own pictures. It was a gesture of idealism significant in the first year of peace. Otherwise, it was a grim year. The year of the Red Scare. Suspected Bolsheviks were rounded up and deported to Russia. Strikes and race riots made the newsreels resemble Intolerance. Griffith's main release of the year startled all who saw it. A love story between the races, a 15-year-old girl of the London slums and a Chinese man. It was based on a short story by Thomas Burke set in Limehouse. The part of the child did not appeal to Lillian Gish. She thought she was too old and too tall.
I said, I'll teach any little girl, get a 10-year-old child, because they always look older on screen than they are. And he said, don't be ridiculous. You know a child can't play those emotional scenes. You go upstairs and get your costumes.
No sooner had she done so than she fell ill in the Spanish flu epidemic. Rehearsals began with Carol Dempster in her role. A dancer, she was starting to play leading roles for Griffith. Griffith cast Richard Barthelmess as the Chinese man. He wanted him to play the role as gentle and sensitive. A contrast to the usual movie Oriental, epitomized by Sesshu Hayakawa in Cecil B. DeMille's The Cheat. The Cheat had been a sensation, but the Japanese protested, and in the 1918 reissue, DeMille was obliged to change the character in the titles to a Burmese. Griffith had himself made one of the few films about racial prejudice at Biograph in 1910. Griffith bathed his film in atmosphere. Opium dens, prostitutes, the shadowy underworld of Limehouse. He used Los Angeles Chinatown for a shot or two, but the film became famous for its imaginative use of studio sets. Griffith's Limehouse was evoked through such paintings as this by the English painter Charles Hemy. Some shots were designed virtually as moving paintings, using miniatures and even cutouts. It was a stylization absolutely new to the screen. In the tradition of Dickens, the father, played by Donald Crisp, was a larger-than-life version of a brutal prizefighter. Lillian Gish began work even before she had quite recovered from the Spanish flu.
And during rehearsal, without thinking, I put a smile on my face, you know, that business. And Griffith, who wouldn't come near me without a mask, rushed up to me and said, "Where did you get that gesture? I've never seen a gesture like that. Where did that come from?" And I said, "I don't know. I just did it." He said, "Well, we'll go back and rehearse the story again. I'll use it all the way through."
After yet another beating from her father, she stumbles into the Chinaman's shop. With music and light, he transformed the man's humble garret into a place of wonder and romance. Griffith commissioned Louis Gottschalk to write a special score and contributed this theme himself. With its elaborate tinting, the photography had a strikingly new look. Bitzer was the main cameraman, but Griffith had brought in Henrik Sato, portrait photographer, to give an ethereal look to scenes like these, which he achieved by using a special soft focus lens. In the boxing scenes, Donald Crisp fought Kid McCoy, a former champion. The father tracks the girl to the Chinaman's shop. The film reached a peak of emotional intensity which Griffith had only achieved before with mass spectacle. Here he did it with 2 players and a simple set.
And I played it as a child would play it. A child would be like an animal, no restraint. And it was sick-making with the sound, the screams, the yelling, the pounding. And when it was over, Mr. Griffith said, "I didn't know you were going to do that. Why didn't you tell me?" He was all white and shaking. And he said, "Now I have to go get another camera." Well, he left us. And he went out, and he came back with a man from Variety magazine. who just had his breakfast, and we did it a second time, and the man from Variety had to go outside, and he lost his breakfast.
Adolf Zukor had financed the film.
Mr. Zukor said, "You may as well put your hand in my pocket and steal the money. Everybody in it dies. It isn't commercial."
Griffith, who thought he'd put tragic poetry on the screen, bought the film back and released it through United Artists. How could he sell this tragedy to the public? He promoted it as the first art film, outside the usual run of entertainment, which no art lover could afford to miss.
Even the ushers were dressed in Chinese costumes, and the screen was bathed in gorgeous blue and red lights, which were thrown upon it from the balcony.
This system he devised and patented himself.
I'm not sure I realized how great a film Broken Blossoms was the first night. I had gone expecting to see something spectacular, you see.
Spectacle or not, critics hailed it as the cinema's highest work of art. A number of Oriental films followed it, a tribute to the power of Griffith's influence. But Griffith was moving away from Hollywood, where he never felt entirely at home. He believed he could achieve greater independence on the East Coast. In the tradition of the great actor-managers, he acquired an estate at Mamaroneck, New York.
There is the aspect of Mamaroneck that appealed to him symbolically as some sort of a plantation, a major studio that he could dominate as he imagined his ancestors had dominated their estates.
The groundbreaking ceremony was presided over by his brother, Albert. Lillian Gish was given the job of directing her sister Dorothy, a job she didn't relish in a half-finished studio. Griffith had shot in the snow, but he hated the cold. He took his company on location to Florida to make 2 minor films to complete a contract. The first, The Idol Dancer, featured Clarine Seymour, who had recently joined the company. The Love Flower starred Carol Dempster, with whom Griffith had become romantically attached. He was now separated from his wife, Linda. Griffith took his company on a location trip in a yacht, ran into a storm and disappeared. It caused headlines across the country. 5 days later, he reappeared in the Bahamas. A most distressing experience, said Griffith. The 2 films were poorly received. If Griffith feeds us such hastily made stuff, said Variety, he'll lose his reputation. They had a point. Films were becoming more sophisticated. Among the hits of 1919 were DeMille's series of risque sex comedies and Blind Husbands, von Stroheim's cynical view of marital infidelity. Back at Mamaroneck, Griffith started a new film for United Artists. He began to put up sets for a farm modelled on his old home, though situated in New England. Griffith had bought an old warhorse of a play for a record amount called Way Down East. Even his closest colleagues thought he'd made a great mistake. But the project was of great importance to him, and he rehearsed it intensively.
Everything happened in rehearsals. He never did anything without weeks of rehearsals. It was important. Way Down East, 8 weeks, from early morning to late at night. Every scene, it was timed. The cameraman knew how long the insert should be, how close. Everything was ready when we went before the cameras.
This rare piece of film shows one of these rehearsals. Griffith often acted out what he wanted his players to do, and here he shows Vivia Ogden how the gossip should behave. The gossip tells the squire that the girl he employs has had an illegitimate child. In one of the most famous scenes of melodrama, he orders the girl out into the snow. Lillian Gish showed true heroism in the face of a real blizzard.
Griffith saw the icicles forming and how heavy and snowbound my face was, all plastered with snow as it melted. He wanted Billy to put it on film, and he yelled to get that face, and Billy said, "I will if the oil in the camera hasn't frozen."
The camera was fitted with an acetylene heater, since Bitzer had to cope with weeks of sub-zero temperatures. This was just one of the problems they had to solve in filming the ice floe scene, which would become one of the best remembered sequences in film history. The girl collapses onto the frozen river. Her lover, Richard Barthelmess, sees the ice break up and the girl heading for the falls. A location was chosen above the Hartford Dam near White River Junction, Vermont. However much he hated the cold, Griffith had no choice. The company spent weeks working on the ice. Men had to saw up the ice, and when that didn't work, they blew it loose with dynamite. Sometimes the current was too strong, and the ice was swept beyond the bridge. Dorothy Gish came up to watch her sister's performance. Day after day at this Hartford location, Lillian Gish was obliged to lie on an ice floe in a thin dress. The scene was not even part of the original play. Griffith was probably inspired by a scene in Uncle Tom's Cabin, Eliza's pursuit across the frozen river. Richard Barthelmess, encumbered by this raccoon coat, did many of the stunts himself, taking frequent drenchings. The cameramen stood on property ice floes made of wood. Lillian Gish often had to lie on real ones, trailing her hand in the water. Her ordeal became more than she could stand.
She just said she couldn't take any more of it, that's all. She was completely frozen. She says, "I'm chilled all through. I don't know as I'll live. I'll have pneumonia," she says.
On one of the few occasions in her career, Lillian Gish agreed to a double, and then Griffith was equally demanding of her.
I was certainly all set, and they were starting to take pictures, and he come back to check. "Oh, no, that's wrong, all wrong." He says, "All wrong." I remember him hearing and yelling, "All wrong. Face the other way." Got to face it the way the ice was coming. So, had to do it all over again. Get right on the other side. And then I was getting disgusted with him. I thought he was crazy and didn't know what he wanted himself.
Catherine Johnston was a Vermont girl, used to harsh conditions, but trailing her hand in the water like Lillian Gish proved too much.
Just a few minutes of that would practically freeze your hand off. After you took it out, you'd get chilblains, you know. It was horrible. get in and get it warmed up a little bit, and when it started to come through, it would ache and hurt terribly. I can still feel it.
Catherine Johnston spent just one memorable day on the picture. Lillian Gish had to spend day after day on the freezing ice until Griffith was satisfied. Griffith returned to Mamaroneck while his assistant, Elmer Clifton, took charge of the crew for the final stage. The great ice break for which men were on hand day and night. At the first signs of the thaw, cameras were rushed into position. When the double for Barthelmess thought a stunt too dangerous, Elmer Clifton doubled the double. At the Hartford Dam, schoolchildren gathered to watch the rescue.
We see the guy come in with his arms outstretched, try to rescue her. Well, that was really very exciting to see, but he didn't rescue her. She went over the dam. Some of the girls started crying. I remember that. Says, oh, there she goes, there she goes. They started to cry. Because us boys didn't cry. We didn't know what to make of it, to tell you the truth.
The company had been trying out dummies for the long shots.
At that time, we had no way of knowing if they were dummies or not. And it was a long while afterwards before we come to that it was dummies.
Griffith rejected the dummies and used a more ingenious ploy. During the summer, he went to Farmington, Connecticut, and using wooden ice floes and a mill race similar to this, he restaged the rescue with far less risk to the actors. Lillian Gish could now trail her hair in the water, and shots of a full-size waterfall completed the illusion. During the making of the film, his family, as Griffith called his company, was struck by two tragedies. Clarine Seymour died after an operation. The day before the premiere, he was stunned by news of a fatal accident to his best-loved actor. Bobby Harron had been a boy actor at Biograph when Griffith first arrived. Griffith is in the centre. He grew up with the company and became a particularly close friend of Griffith.
He came many times for dinner, and it was just like one big family.
Harron was an actor Griffith used consistently. He was in 160 biographs. Griffith gave him important roles in The Birth of a Nation and Intolerance, and chose him to play himself when young in a series of films based on his rural past. But Griffith had turned more and more to Richard Barthelmess, which made the death all the harder for Griffith.
All the studios out here, the funeral was in New York, but all the studios out here stopped while Bobby was being buried. They've never done that for anybody else before or since.
After Bobby's death, said Billy Bitzer, it was never the same again. Meanwhile, Way Down East had opened. Its great ice flow sequence astonished the public. All those patient weeks on the ice were now paying off. The ice flow sequence ensured that though Way Down East may have cost more than any film Griffith had made, it was a box office triumph. He had confounded his critics and produced another masterpiece. But now other great directors were moving up. Hollywood was entering its golden era. Griffith had helped to create it. Now it faced him with his greatest challenge.